Hey, I'm Amy Cornell, and I'm your Texas broker for Front Real Estate, and I'm here to help you real estate better. So, one of the questions that I get from buyers is, how much should I offer on this house? What should my terms be? How do I create this offer? And although I want to be there to help advise and make sure that they are making the best decision for their family, I ultimately cannot bear the responsibility of that decision for every buyer, right? I did for a while, and it made me very old fast. So I'm going to encourage you really to not bear that decision for them, but to prepare them and give them as much data and information as you can so that then they can make the most appropriate decision with you, where you're not making the decision though and like bringing them along. Hopefully that distinction makes sense, because it is kind of a nuance, but it really does make a big difference in your relationship with the client and how you will continue to work together. All right, so what that means for me is that I need to prepare a data package to send to them every single time before we make an offer. And so I do this same process every time. You know, I've talked about systemization, and that systemization can so help your business because you are doing the same thing. It's just a very routine part of the process. And so you know exactly what to expect from your day, but that way then your client also knows what to expect. It creates a very consistent client experience, and it creates a consistency for you as well. It also is a great risk management tool, because if there was ever a situation down the road where, let's say that the client had a short appraisal, and so they found out about that in week 3, they had already sold their house. They never would have listed their house if they thought this house might come in at a short appraisal, and they come back to you and say, hey, why didn't you tell me? Well, this is part of that you could say, well, in the data package, I showed you a CMA. We talked about that it was close, but that we thought that it would get there. You know that, this is a process and an estimate, and I had that in there. And so, I feel like I did everything I could. I think a judge would agree with me. Ultimately, he likely would. Now, if they said, hey, you didn't send me that email, well, you should have proof that you did send it, right? And so, it just gives you a lot of layers of risk reduction to make sure that you are doing, first off, the best job for the client, but also protecting your business so that nobody can come back to you down the road and say you didn't do 100% on your buyer representation responsibilities. Okay, so that's really why we do it. The other reason why we do it is we want to make sure that we don't get in a situation where we know data about the house that the client doesn't. I had a situation a few years ago where I had some agents that found out per MLS that the house had sold, and I want to say, I'm going to use round numbers. I want to say the house had sold for $475 in 1 year, and then like 18 months later, they had a client that wanted to pay, or that was going to pay $600 for it, and there had really been absolutely no improvements to the house. The market had increased a little bit, but not $125,000. And really what had happened, the 475 was a pretty distressed sale. The seller probably could have gotten more, but they needed to get out of town, or so the story goes, right? So, they didn't want to tell their buyer client about that, because they're like, he's comfortable with the 600. The comp stays 600. Everything is okay at that. Why tell him about that 475? That's just going to upset him, and it's going to make him potentially rethink, is that house really worth 600? Well, so why do I as a broker want to make sure that client has all those data points, all the same data that we have? Why do I want to make sure they have that? Well, what are the chances that the neighbor, when they go and meet them on the first night that they're in the house, talks to them about like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you got this house. Those last people kind of stole it from that lady. I mean, I can't believe they only paid $475 for the house 18 months ago, and now they just made $125,000 and they're out to Cabo or something. But yeah, I mean, we're so glad y'all are going to be our neighbors. We're really excited to meet y'all. That can happen, right? You know that it can. And so we just need to make sure, hey, if there's data out there that we know about it, whether it's a death that was on the property, whether it's a new Walmart that's going in behind the house, if there is anything that we know about that property, we are obligated to say. Now, if we don't know about it, I get it. But if we have access to it in MLS, we know about it. And so if you as an agent are not going and looking through the history at MLS to see what has happened to that house, then to me, you're not really doing your full responsibility as a buyer rep. And so this is for me, this is for them, this is a great CYA, but this is just a process that I go through every single time to make sure that I've given the client all this information, and then I'm going to let them lead the process on how we're going to make that final offer. All right. So I'm going to pop over to my PowerPoint just so that I don't forget to tell you anything again. So here are the things that I send to the client. I think it got cut off, but I send all these available items to the client. First off, I do a CMA. I call it my confirmation CMA. So I do a full, for me, I do a full cloud CMA, and you can see some of my other videos where I talk about how to do a cloud CMA. I do a full cloud CMA just like I was going to go in and list the property and, didn't have any sort of other resources. Now, we do have other resources. The cat is already out of the bag of what the seller is asking for the house. And so in some ways, I'm preparing it from scratch, but also in other ways, it's like an appraisal. I know what number we're trying to hit. And so I'm really trying to confirm, hey, if you offered this, do I think that it would appraise? So I have that full CMA. I include that with them so that they can look at the pictures of the comps. They can do all the same things that one of my sellers would do. Okay, so I have that. Then I I like the realist tax report. There's also some great RPR reports that also have all the data in them. Whatever you have, just make sure that it is more complete from a data perspective. Realist I like because it has the CoreLogic public data, so it's going to have your tax appraisal district information. It's also going to have your tax rates and tax amounts that have been paid in the last few years. It's also going to have your last solds as well as the last county recorded documents, both from a deed and a mortgage perspective on there. It is not going to tell you the current balance on the mortgage, but it will tell you if they refied the house last year for more than what they have it listed. That's going to be a great red flag and something for me to help with our negotiation with them of saying, hey, they may not be able to take a whole lot less than that based on this. I don't know what the current balance is, but just so y'all know, like this was the debt that they took out last year. Some information like that is very helpful to know in your negotiation. So I really like the realist tax report for that. But again, RPR has a very similar report. That's totally fine too. I want to include the survey and the T47 if I've received it. Again, I just want to make sure they have everything that I have. The HOA resale package, if that was loaded onto MLS, for me and my process for the sellers, I always load that onto MLS when we list the property, so it could be out there for them. A current seller's disclosure, so hopefully the agent has loaded a current seller's disclosure into the document section of MLS, so I'm going to pull that out and send that to them. The current MLS data sheet, so I go ahead and make a PDF of the current MLS data sheet. I know that that information is going to stay in MLS, potentially forever, right? However, I want to make sure that I have a static record of what it said on the day that we made the offer. Okay, I don't want there to be any chance of data loss or something like that for something to have changed on it. Maybe the agent realized halfway through our transaction that the house really is not gas, it is all electric, and they went back in and changed it. I just want to know what I had in the very beginning. I always carry these papers through, and so sometimes I'll keep the paper, but honestly, I don't like to have a lot of clutter around, so I normally will just send them a PDF so that way then we all have a static record of what the MLS form said. Then I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to go back and pull any old MLS sheets that I can find. I also try to find any pictures that go along with that. So like in the scenario that I was talking about earlier, if there was something that it sold for $475 and now it's selling for $6, I'm going to try to include the pictures because hopefully it shows like, oh my gosh, that looks like not great. Now it looks great. Look, they did this, 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 and you can tell from the pictures, not necessarily from the MLS description. So I may pull that. I'm also going to go back through those MLS sheets and pull any old seller's disclosures that I have on there. Y'all, earlier this year, I found one that when I pulled the old seller's disclosure, it disclosed that it had flooded 5 times. The current seller's disclosure did not say that. I let the agent know, luckily, and said, hey, you probably didn't go back and look at all these, but look, the old seller's disclosure says this. You've got a real issue with that listing because right now it's not saying that. And we almost made an offer thinking that it hadn't flooded, and it would have been a really bad day for you and me if that buyer had gone through and then found out, hey, actually, MLS told you that it had flooded before. Again, I get that that is above and beyond, y'all. I get it. That is hard to have to go through all the layers of all the old data on MLS for every single house that your buyer is even considering making an offer on. I get it. But y'all, we are being well paid, or I am being well paid because I'm negotiating a good commission on it. So in my opinion, that is part of what the service level that I provide for my client. I think it's the most protection for them. I think it's the most protection for me. So I really do go to that extra level, get all those old seller disclosures, get all those old MLS sheets, get it all to them. Now, I will tell you, I don't necessarily go through every single bit of data that I send them with a fine-tooth comb. And I don't know if my client does or not. It really depends on their personality type, who they are, like what kind of comfort level they have with it. But at minimum, I have provided it, right? I've glanced through it. I didn't see any red flags. I sent it to them. Okay. Then any other known information or public data references. So this would be, if you know that Walmart is building behind, this might be taking that, story from the Fort Star Telegram and putting that in there. If there's something else that you know that you need them to know, don't be afraid to include it here. Okay. This is not something that you need to be holding back on data on if you know about it and it is out there in the public. All right, and then a fee estimate updated for the property. So we talked about in working with our lender partners that one of the things I require from, or I ask, but that I do require from my lender partners is that I want not only a pre-qual, but I also want a fee estimate. So once my buyer has decided, hey, yes, I think this is the one that we're going to make the offer on. Let's say that my fee estimate was for $300 and they're going to offer $305 to make their offer more competitive. I'm going to go ahead and get an updated fee estimate at $305 so that they can see, how much that increased the payment, whatever that is. So I want to get that updated for this property specifically. Also, we can pull more exact tax numbers for this property. And so I want to get that as updated as possible for the buyer. Now, I may not have all of this data. There may be something that is missing. There may be whatever. That's totally fine. So I don't want to not send it and say, well, I'm still working on gathering data. I'm not doing that. I am just going to pull everything that I have access to, send it to them as quickly as possible. I will tell you, this entire process for me never takes more than 30 minutes. Even to prepare the CMA, to pull all this stuff, to make it, and I have them all in PDFs and then take them all into an email and out to them. It really normally takes more like 15. It's just not that big a deal to go through and pull all this information to help the the client at that point, because we do have a buyer rep. This is not something that I provide to customers. It's only something that I provide to clients that are working with me on a buyer representation agreement, but that's also the only people that I'm showing houses to or writing offers for. So this is part of my client level services. All right. The other thing to keep in mind is that some sellers choose to disclose less than others. I get this question a lot from agents that this seller's disclosure just really is not fully complete. They didn't say anything about gas or electric, or they didn't say anything about that. I get that. I, as a buyer's agent, cannot force a seller to fill out a seller's disclosure more completely. As a buyer, that buyer can choose to walk away from that property. If they don't like that level of disclosure, they can choose to walk. But if they see that seller's disclosure and they accept it with that, if they had a material thing that was not disclosed on it, they still potentially have a case for a lawsuit against a seller. I just can't guarantee that, right? I don't know. I don't know what the situation might be. I don't know what to predict on that. And so really at that point, I would say, hey, buyer, if you're comfortable with this, great. If you're not comfortable with this, you should contact an attorney and talk through what that looks like. Don't be afraid to tell your client to contact an attorney to go over this stuff, right? we're providing all this data, but ultimately the analysis and all of it, we can help with, but they need to take some responsibility for it. They need to understand what they're looking at and what some of these are, and we can help with that, but we are not here to, totally dissect every single bit, because there are some buyers that want that and some that don't. So ultimately, it's really on them to decide how far they want to go with that data analysis. All right, hope that makes sense. So this is just the CMA that I do when I send it. Again, I don't take a special picture for it. I just include the map on there. It really should not take you very long to do a confirmation CMA. And this is an example of the email that I send out with all of the PDFs. So I have all my PDFs here, and then I do a little paragraph analysis. Don't feel like you are getting stuck on that. I think so many people do, right? They're like, I don't know how to write a paragraph of analysis on the house. Really, it doesn't even have to be a full paragraph. It could be something as simple as, here's the data that I pulled on 123 Main. It looks like 300 would be a good offer. Okay, that is okay. You don't have to say all this stuff. It's just a matter of how far do you want to go. Again, how professional do you want to be in your presentation of this? Because this right here, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where your clients are going to remember you. This is where clients are going to say to their friends, like, you would not believe what level of service I got from my agent. You have got to call them. Did your agent send you all the old seller's disclosures, not even the first one? Did your agent go back and do a full market analysis on every property that you considered? Oh my gosh, I felt so special, and I felt so prepared to make this really big decision because I had all the data that I needed. And I will tell you, not every single buyer is super consumed with data, right? So just like we talked about personality types, there are some personality types that they're going to look at all that and be like, oh my gosh, that was a lot of that. You did a lot of work, but you said 300. Okay. Yeah, I'm going with 300. Okay. And that's okay too. It's not that they have to fully, engulf all of that, but it's that you have to be able to lay your head down at night and say, I did the best job that I could. I provided best in the world service to my buyer, and I believe that they are making a great decision on this house, and I'm excited to serve them now, and I'm going to be excited to sell this house for them when they are done with it, because that's the deal, right? I am telling them all this because I'm going to be listing this house probably within the next 5 to 10 years. And so I want to make sure that they're not buying a lemon. I want to make sure that we're not going to have a problem with flooding. I want to make sure that they are not overpaying for that house. So the only way that I can do that is by providing them the data up front. So I hope that this helps. Make it part of your system. So in between, we're seeing the house and we're writing the offer. This is the process that we're doing. Again, it shouldn't take more than half an hour, but it really is a very important part to really make sure that your client is very comfortable and confident in going forward with that offer. I hope it helps. Thanks, guys.